My name is David Hallinan. I'm here to give you a talk about unified APIs and the future of integrations. So I'm going to try to do this with a different screen sharing, so hopefully I don't get too many technical difficulties going on. So first, a little bit about me. My name is David Hallinan. I am the head of content for Cloudless, and we are a company based out of Berkeley, California. I recently came onto this position at Cloudless after years of being a Rails developer and then teaching full-stack JavaScript at the University of California at Berkeley. So needless to say, it was a very big pivot coming on to produce content aimed at developers and product managers alike, and getting to come to events like this and talk to beautiful people like yourselves. So a little bit about Cloudless at a high level. We provide unified APIs to allow product teams connecting to multiple cloud services for a particular use case, deploy their product 8 times faster, and reduce maintenance by a factor of about 4. Essentially, these unified APIs are providing dev teams in many different industries the ability to reach market faster. We found that teams were spending thousands of hours building and then, most importantly, maintaining integrations once they'd been built to multiple services that would in turn take away from time to focus on what was actually important to their code base, their own unique functionality. And we helped to cut down Jira tickets by about 1,000,000%, which is not a real metric, by the way, but it is relatively close. So today I'm going to share my take on the future of enterprise connectivity, as well as show you how beneficial unified data models can be through the use of one of our UI tools. So first, I'd like to offer my take on how unified APIs are solving the future of integrations. And I believe that starts with the end user. So users hate change. And actually, I can walk that back a little bit. Users hate being forced into change. Users are simply people, and when given the chance, they will go with what they know and what they feel comfortable with, more importantly. We've all had moments in our lives where instead of the new and the mysterious, we side with what makes us feel at home or comfortable. We love our security blankets. We rewatch the entirety of television shows despite the abundance of new programming on television. We wear sweatshirts with holes in them that we've had for 20 years. So obviously at points we branch out and we consume new media and we buy new clothes, but those decisions take concerted effort and they are not nearly as easy to make as just rewatching The Office for the 10th time or buying the pair of New Balances that you know you like already. So in that vein, forcing users into an integration that they may not already use, be it a cloud storage or a calendar provider, is the fastest way to turn away potential users. So to keep this as filled with analogies as possible, because frankly that's my favorite way to convey information, I feel like this can best be summed up with pizza. So we all love pizza. At least I hope we all love pizza. More than that, we all love our favorite pizza. So I may be able to tell you why Chicago deep dish, or New York thin style, or California farm-to-table fresh organic flatbread is the best type of pizza. And there's probably quantifiable data that could back up why each one of those types of pizza is actually the best pizza on earth. But at the end of the day, we all have our own opinions that drive our impulses, and you very well may look me in the eye and tell me that your favorite pizza is something like this. So there is probably no quantifiable data to back up that Little Caesars is the best pizza on earth. And if it is probably from the same 1 out of 10 dentists in a toothpaste commercial that doesn't agree with the rest of them. And frankly, he has a brilliant racket for this guy. Which I just wanted to put this slide in there. Frankly, I feel really bad for this guy who showed up to a royalty-free photo shoot and wound up as a gold-toothed dentist making it rain in my tech conference talk. But I feel like I'm getting off track here, quite a bit. So I'm going to get back to what's important, pizza. So if someone's favorite pizza is their favorite cloud service integration, then despite all your best efforts to tell them that you believe an alternative is a better choice, they very well may not care. They know what they like, and more importantly than that, they know what they're deeply invested in at that point. So let's say I'm building the next big collaborate app, Sync app, patent pending. So my application needs to seamlessly allow the syncing of data between multiple cloud storage providers to work, to get the functionality that I actually want out of it. So I'm just starting out on a product roadmap for this application, and the only thing that's clear at this point is that I need to provide my future users with cloud storage services that they are already ingrained in. So to abandon pizza entirely, which is frankly the saddest sentence I've ever said, in this analogy, my application is a mini mall, right? So I know in order for a mall to attract users to it, they have to provide food for them. They need sustenance. So that's not to say that food is the most important part of a mall. It absolutely is not. But you need it to draw people in and attract them to what they are there for in the first place, and that is to spend money. However, just like in order to attract users to a mall, I need to attract users with unique functionality contained inside my application. I'm going to have to provide integrations for that fact. So they are not the most important part of my app. The most important part of my app is my unique functionality contained inside, but my app still needs those integrations to make it work. So in that sense, I don't want users to show up and see something like this. Because even though many of my potential users may be ingrained in Dropbox already, many of them will not be. A user that has all their files and documents and potential workflow in Box or Ignite or Google Drive is likely to forego my application entirely in search of another that provides the integration that they're actually looking for. Never underestimate a user's aversion to migrating all their files and folders to a new cloud storage service. It's essentially the internet's version of moving houses. It's an exhausting process, and nobody really wants to do it. So either that, or they're forced to go to a third party entirely. So there's lots of automated workflow choices out there. Zapier, Workato. The problem is, if they are unembedded, they can be detrimental to my app for a multitude of reasons, and keyword unembedded at that point. So first, users are forced to go to someplace else entirely to even use my product. That's something you can count on weeding out at least a handful of users due to apathy alone. Secondly, automated workflow services don't support absolutely everything. If my potential workflow isn't supported, a third-party iPaaS system has to actually go in and build out that integration in order for me to use it whatsoever in my application at all. So these automated workflow services provide wonderful, really deep, great functionality, but they don't provide everything. If they don't offer what I need, I'm out of luck. So my application mall really needs people to show up and see something like this. So almost any potential user will see value in my product if they show up and see a service integration that they are already comfortable and deeply ingrained in. By doing this, I can already guarantee that some of my new users will more than likely at least take the time to give my application a fair shake that it deserves. The problem with offering only one integration, or even a small few, is that people will leave before I've had the chance to win them over. My application might work amazingly with just Dropbox application, but users who don't use Dropbox, users who use Box or Google Drive or any of these other cloud storage providers will probably be too stubborn to even give it a try in the first place. So no one likes to sign up for a new service when it's not on their own terms. I am not an evangelist for these storage platforms. Therefore, by choosing one of them, I'm forcing myself into the role of advocating for a platform entirely different than my own. I should be worried about advocating for my own platform, not for another one that integrates with mine. So just as like a quick stopping point, is anybody in the audience like working on integrations right now at this point in their code base? Yeah? Not too, it's too hard to like call on specifics out there. Anything that's like troubling you? Anything that's really hard going on with that right now?
The sheer number of different configuration files if I want to use different platforms.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Anybody want to add?
Documentation.
Yes, right? So documentation is a big one. In order for me to put all of these inside my application, it means that I have a developer or a team of developers going through and learning the documentation for each and every one of these to know what the response is going to give me, to know how to access each one of these endpoints correctly. And the fact of the matter is the biggest problem that we ran into when we were an integrations company, because we technically started as a Gmail extension that would plug into your inbox and users could use something other than Google Drive to add files to their email. The problem that we had was we ended up just maintaining integrations over and over again. A version would change, a response format would change, and we would have to scramble to go back to fix these things or else they would be entirely broken. We found out that we were spending more of our time on maintenance than actually innovating at anything at all. So thank you so much for your input right there. So a little insight into a few cases that we've worked with recently. We worked recently with SignNow, which is an e-document company, and so they had run into a problem with their integrations in that they were building connections with API integrations as one-offs, right? They would build one, they would get it working, and then they'd have to maintain it in the future. So aside from the time they needed to get familiar with the minute details of these connectors, which is essentially reading the documentation and poring over it and spending a lot of hours doing it, a major problem persisted, which is the same one we ran into. Anytime an API would make changes to its response or versioning or anything new happened with it, essentially all of their integrations would break. SignNow developers spent a considerable amount of time re-examining docs and refactoring codes to accommodate for that API's changes. Another one that we worked with recently was Blackboard, which is an educational company that provides tools for students and teachers to be able to sync files back and forth, classroom tools to kind of add technological tools into the classroom. But their problem was that they had inherited a bespoke integration for Dropbox, and so they essentially thought that they'd go about building everything in the same way. They would build them one-off and they would keep going. I believe Microsoft OneDrive was the integration that their users were asking for the most, and so they went about building OneDrive, and soon they ran into a huge, huge roadblock with that. As it turned out, the initial integration wasn't the thing that really gave them a headache. It was maintaining that integration. So over 3 years, I believe they racked up 600 Jira tickets and 8,800 hours maintaining that one integration alone. Which frankly, if you've worked on integrations before in any sort of development team, you know that maintaining them is really the bulk of the work. And at that point, when I'm talking about 1, 2, 3, 8, 7 different integrations, I'm talking about a full-time development team that's just there working on maintaining these connections, essentially taking away from all of my ability to actually provide my application with unique functionality, with what it's supposed to do. So Blackboard needed these storage API services to be able to sync with one another. A student would have Dropbox. A teacher would have Box, Google Drive. They wanted these files and documents to be able to go up and be able to sync between all of these services. So they ran into another problem. How do these services communicate with each other? How do they, based on this ridiculous slide right here, how do they sit on a swing set and gossip with each other? So point-to-point integrations are very hard. And even when you put in enough time and effort to build them, they're prone to completely breaking when one of the two services changes its response data. So this ends in every developer's favorite pastime, which is quickly scrambling to implement fixes. Now, it's true that some developers are masochistic, but usually that's when it's their own choice. Usually that's on their own terms, not when they're being told to do so. So it's true. Quickly fixing these broken integrations leads to sloppy and incomplete work. And that's not an indictment on whoever fixes the problems. It's the reality of having users that depend on a service suddenly going down and needing to be fixed quick. That's not conducive to having quality work being done, no matter who it is performing that work. The fact is, each of these services returns its own raw data. There's no global framework for the response data from a cloud storage API. So if your application requires these services to communicate with each other, you've now made your developers' lives exponentially harder. They're responsible for formatting every single response that comes through and making that object parsable by the other. When we get to talking about more than 2, we're talking about a considerable amount of work. So what these services need is a form of an interpreter. So in this case, my app acts as the interpreter. If my app is using something like a unified API to talk to these two services, then my app is the interpreter between them. And again, I really like this clip art pasted guy into here. So an intermediary can grab this response from one service, translate it into a request from the other that one already knows how to interpret. These services speak their own language in a sense, so they need a form of middleware there to translate the comings and goings of each service. So unifying the data models, and I'm going to give you a look at what I'm talking about with unified data models in a minute with a real-life example. But unifying these data models is only one part of the way that a unified API actually eases the integration work. The other part that really, really helps the developers is a unified endpoint. So in this case, This standard post right here is a unified endpoint that can talk to each and every one of these cloud storage services. So by having a user go through, use an OAuth 2 flow to authenticate with Dropbox or Google Drive or Box, you can store that account ID, and then no matter what service they're actually accessing, it's as simple as popping in the account ID parameter and having this lead to each one of those services. So a series of REST endpoints that are configured across any and all categorical services through their unique ID means that something like this simple post can connect to all available storage services based on what the user has authenticated. If they authenticate their Google Drive, this points to there. If they authenticate their Box, this points to there, and so on. Your internal APIs, as a result, require much, much less routes. If this accesses every single storage service you had, then you only need one CRUD route for each and every one of these available actions. So a unified endpoint means that every supported service, we're still talking about a single route for a single CRUD action. Once a user authenticates a service, then that account ID can be stored and used as a parameter in these endpoints. And more than that, if a user authenticates 2 services, it can be stored for both of them and then slotted in and out depending on which one they want to access. So this is really what we ran into when we initially were working as an integrations company. We were doing most of our work on maintenance and not on actually innovating, which seems like that's what the point of this is, but this image is not really to show you that maintenance makes up the lion's share of the work while innovation is only a slice. It's to show you that your work from the outside looking in looked like a sweet cake of productivity, when in fact it is a soggy and salty quiche of frustration. Right, I like that. And so with that, I'm going to go into a small demo using one of these UI tools I'm talking about, just so I can show you what this unified data model response actually looks like, to kind of show you the importance of how easy this makes putting integrations into your code base for your developer. So I'm going to do this quick jump over to mirror my Retina display, and whoop, there we go. Cool, so right off the bat, that better? Yeah. So I'm just going to be using this open source JavaScript library. It's a UI tool. You do not need to use this when you're using our tool or really almost any unified API. This has nothing to do with our specific one. It's just a way for a user to be able to quickly get in and authenticate any of their services. So before we get into that, I'm going to show you quickly what we're looking at. And so right here, we have a really, really, really basic static site. Couple of things to note. We have a button that is going to be kicking off. Oh, it's really bad on dark theme. Can you guys see that dark? Yeah, a little bit? OK, cool. I'm not going to switch themes then. So I have a button that's going to kick off everything. I essentially have a method that's waiting for this button to get hit, and then we're going to kick off our whole UI library. Besides that, I have a table here. So I'm going to be taking the JSON response from this unified data model, and I'm going to be putting it up on an actual table on the page so I don't have to go into my inspector and show you the actual JSON object. Besides that, I'm bringing in this whole library through a CDN here, and then I'm instantiating this Explorer object here with an app ID. And that's really all that's going on. There is an event handler here that when this actually works, in my callback, the files will be what that unified data model has given back to me from these services I authenticate. So essentially, this is what we really care about. We care about what this files in the callback is because it is my JSON response once it has been run through this unified data model. So down here, the other thing is we have a built-in method called chooseify. We're feeding the button to that. The button gets clicked. We kick off the whole thing. Very, very simple, just to show you what we're looking at. So if I go back, I'm going to go into Google and hey, there's my, oh, wait, you know what? It's actually, this is, I used to teach, so this is something I'm actually pretty good at. A lot of times, it's pretty easy to not kick off your server. So I'm just going to run a quick little Python server. And here we go. So inside of here, I have this beautiful application. You can tell I worked really, really hard on this. It has a nav bar. That should be enough to impress you, right? So sync app. This is my app I'm building. I need this to be able to authenticate and communicate between all these different cloud storage providers. So when I click sync files, we're going to kick off this whole UI library. And just like that, if a user hasn't authenticated anything, we're going to be giving them access to each and every service that they can authenticate with. So not all of these are standard file storage. Some of them are object storage. We have messaging through Slack. Like all of these services are available through this UI, but we're just going to be looking at storage right now. So right off the bat, I'm going to go in and I'm going to authenticate with Google Drive. So if I click on here, we're going to get a standard OAuth 2 flow. I'm going to go through with my admin syncer for admin-syncapps.io. That is my real surname. And yes, just as a side note, not that this really has to do with our platform at all, you can white label all of this stuff. This is not something where you have to let users know that they're going through another application in the first place. And just like that, once a user is authenticated, the unified API side is going to store that refresh token. They're also going to store the account ID that knows exactly what user and what account ID that's associated with. And just like that, I'm at the root of the Google Drive right here. So before I actually select anything, I'm going to go through and I'm going to authenticate with Dropbox as well. So just like this, I'll click, I'll do another standard little OAuth flow, and sweet. So now I've authenticated with both of these services. I'm going to go into Google Drive, and I'm just going to do a standard get here. I have full CRUD capabilities when it comes to all of this stuff, but I'm just going to do a get, right? The idea behind this is to show you that both of these are going through the same unified endpoint, just a standard get where we are plugging in the account ID for the authenticated account, and then we're going to look at what we get back. So I'll grab a PNG here. Hopefully my internet is going to be, yeah, sweet. So like I said, we're taking the JSON, we're appending it to a table right here. Nothing really like that important going on. As you can see, these ones that have a bunch of different key values on the right side is because we have a nested object, essentially. So none of these are really that important. This is just a standard JSON response, only it's not the standard JSON response coming from Google Drive. So API storage, it's the unified API it's coming through. We're getting an ID that's being assigned from the unified API itself, and then we're getting a raw ID that is actually the ID that Google Drive provides me. We have a couple of timestamps. We have some nested modifier data. We have the parent data, some folder structure data. We're also going to get this nice little aliased link to the actual file itself, which will point us directly to the Google Drive. So not really anything too spectacular about that. It's just a standard JSON response that's been put on a table. Now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to jump into my Dropbox, and I have a JPEG in here. And I'm going to go and I'm going to grab that JPEG, and there's a wonderful little counter here. So response object 1 is my Google Drive. If I go down, I've got response object 2. And now you'll notice that this is identical. The exact same structure of the key value pairs here is the same as the top. And that's because this unified data model has taken the pertinent data from both of them and translated them into an object that I already know what it looks like before I may have even looked at that API in the first place. So somebody in the back there, when I asked that question, and I'm sorry because technically I have my glasses on, but they said documentation was the hardest part. And I couldn't agree more. Documentation is a pain, especially when you're talking about some APIs don't have as good documentation as other APIs, right? It's just a standard fact of some of them are very, very good. Some of them are better funded than others. Some people, it's just maintaining their own library. They're writing their own docs. They don't have the time and the resources to write the best docs in the world. In this case, I may have never looked at Ignite or Dropbox or Google API documentation, and yet I know exactly what I'm going to be getting back. So without ever having looked at those docs in the first place, I can already standardly expect what I'm going to be getting back in this object. So just like my Google Drive, I have API, name, my ID, my raw ID, timestamps. We have the ability to include extra key value pairs that may have not been included in the other one. So IDs, this is not included in the Google Drive. It is in a Dropbox, so we return that in this one. And the idea behind this is that by having this unified data model return you this, your developer already knows what to expect when they add a new service into your code base. If you had Google Drive and Dropbox, if you add in Ignite, if you add in Box, you already know what the response object looks like before you've even glanced at the documentation. Aside from that, you don't have to go into a UI tool like this. This is me just showing you what this actually looks like appended to a screen. This is entirely able to be done through your own routes. But the nice part about that is that this is the same route. This is the same standard get route that's accounts / account ID / storage / files / file ID. That same route points at this exact same thing, despite that we're going to two different APIs here. So the real takeaway from this is that your developers will immediately know, and if you are developers, hopefully you can relate to this, you immediately know what you're getting back. This unified data model immediately makes your life easier when dealing with integrations. So with that, let me jump back really, really quickly. And is that going to be bad? Nope, let's go to this. Decimator, that's a really nice name for the screen. Scary. Yeah, okay. So, hey, one more thing. There we go. Cool. So I have a few more slides, and then I'll take a couple questions. But 1 second. Yeah. Yes. Cool. Sorry for the downtime there. Having two screens is a pain. So with unified APIs, well, I jumped ahead. Yeah, so there's three major takeaways from this. One is the depth of functionality, right? You can harness a deep functionality that would normally require an incredible amount of time to implement yourself. By having unified APIs be the go-between in your integrations mean users can access any and all of these supported services as easy as they would if they were just going directly through them. Next is the most obvious, and that's speed to market, because we're saving an immense amount of coding time. And not just coding time, getting to know the documentation, like we talked about before. Most of that is maintaining these integrations. Maintaining these integrations when anything with the API changes, anything with the response changes, is a huge pain. And finally, the most important in the long run is that it is entirely maintenance-free. With unified APIs, you ensure the long-term stability of your product by offloading your integration maintenance to the unified API. They proactively adjust to a cloud service API's changes, so your connection stays sound. When one cloud service winds down its API, the unified API sits there and updates because they're sitting in the background and monitoring. So your job is to code once to hit the unified API and essentially never touch that code again. So the benefit to this is you get to leave your code as is without experiencing a pause or a lapse of functionality. Essentially, unified APIs allow developers to do what they're best at, and that is to innovate, not to fix broken integrations. There are a few things that will break a developer's spirit, like constantly having to fix broken API integrations. And I know that because I spent about 1.5 years at a small company doing just that over and over and over and over again. There's angry users on one side. There is incomplete or maybe even bad documentation on the other side. And there's a deadline of get it done right now because everything's broke and our users are going crazy. And that's not a good condition to work under. It's not conducive to good work. And it doesn't encourage developers to be passionate about their job, which they absolutely should be. So in the end, right, in the end, all of this is for the user who hates change. If that user can seamlessly begin using your application without needing to sign up for a new service, you've already greatly diminished their chances of closing your app and forgetting about it the second they open it. There are over 10,000 publicly available APIs today, and that number is only increasing. And until there is a universally accepted data format for categorical data, these issues will plague developers who work on integrations. The future of enterprise IT management is not in providing connectivity. Integration work and management should not be the responsibility of internal teams. They should be offloaded to external cloud services, each with their own expertise to deliver plug-and-play integration with other providers. Out-of-the-box connectivity should essentially be table stakes, because when it comes down to it, nobody knows about cloud storage integrations better than Dropbox themselves, or Box themselves, or Google Drive themselves. Nobody knows about calendar integrations better than Google Calendar, or Office 365, or Salesforce for CRM, or HubSpot. So for now, unified APIs provide a simple and easier method to giving your application a leg up on enticing and maintaining users, as well as keeping your developers focused on the part that made you hire them in the first place, or the part that got you hired in the first place, your ability to innovate. So when all these services play together well, it's a win-win situation, both for your code base and for your pizza-loving users, because I had to do a throwback to that. So that is essentially it. Any questions at all? Yeah, please.
How much overhead does Cloudless still have in order to maintain those integrations that you just got done promoting?
How much overhead do they have? What do you mean?
I mean, if you're giving this abstraction layer, if you're unifying this data model, what kind of complexity has that now put on your company?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, essentially, that's the lion's share of what engineers do for a unified API. It is much more about maintaining those integrations that you would have to do yourself if you didn't end up connecting to them. So that ends up making up like a lot of the work. There's obviously ways to cut that down. They get to know these services very, very well. build up relationships with the actual companies themselves, so sometimes they get heads up about things. But yeah, I mean, like that is primarily like the biggest job. Yeah, yeah.
What are the different unified APIs you provide? Different categories?
Yeah, so Cloudless, I can tell you Cloudless specifically. The unified API is more of this, this idea behind having a API sitting in the middle to connect to lots of different categorical services. With Cloudless, it's, we provide file storage for one, so that's cloud file storage and cloud object storage, a calendar API, a CRM API, some ITSM services, and then a new construction API, because we work with a lot of construction companies. Yeah.
Talk a bit about service or your secrets management.
So I'm not actually on the development team. I'm not incredibly high up on that. So we, so why don't you come outside after we're done and come talk to our engineer at the booth, and I'm sure he would actually be able to give you a lot better details on that. So we hold on to the refresh tokens. We never hold on to creds unless they don't use OAuth 2, so some kind of more dated authentication methods, we have to end up seeing the creds, but we don't hold on to those things. So for the most part, we really just hold on to the token. Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
So you access multiple different file storages, but obviously the different services don't provide all the same features. Do you do like a lowest common denominator?
No, so that's a really, really good question. So there are lots of services that provide more things than other ones. We give the ability to return the entire raw response data if you want. So if you need something out of one of these services that you can't get through the unified data model, you can just go get the entire raw response. And that's a great question, yeah, thanks. Anything at all? Great, well actually my time is officially up by 2 minutes. Thank you all so much for attending this. If you have any questions about more in the weeds, technical questions, please come by the booth. We'd be more happy to talk to you. Or if you want to talk about the future of enterprise integration services, then I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much.